Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Nadje Al-Ali. I'm Robert Family Professor of International Studies and Professor of Middle East Studies and Anthropology here at Brown. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's event. It is part of a wide series called Gender and Body Politics, Arts in the Middle East and its Diasporas. And the series is co-convened by Brown University's Center for Middle East Studies and Columbia University's Middle East Institute. Over the past month, well, actually it's now a couple of years, my co-convener Kathryn Poots and I have been in discussion with a number of different artists, including the Palestinian artist Basil Abbas and Ruan Abu Rahmeh, Palestinian artists Tanya El-Khouri and Annabel Dao, Iranian artist Moreshin Alagyari and Ametis Motavelli, and the Iraqi Palestinian artist Sama Al-Shaibi. And I think, oh yes, and we were actually in a conversation with a number of Kurdish artists, Luna Darwish and Nigar Salam. And these conversations are actually available online if you're interested. The series is looking at the way that the backdrop of war and conflict, the rise of authoritarian regimes, displacement, and diaspora mobilization, as well as Islamophobia and ongoing Orientalist depictions, the way that artists are engaging and informed by this context and are contributing to anti-racist, transnational feminist, and queer praxis. So today, as part of our ongoing conversations and engagement with art and body politics, we will be in conversation with Fatma Bucak. My colleague, Professor Kathryn Spellman Poots, will introduce Fatma in a moment, but let me introduce Kathryn to you first. Kathryn Spellman is the acting director of Columbia's Middle East Institute. Her research focuses on women and gender dynamics in Muslim communities in the UK and the US, and she has particular interest in cultural production within the context of diaspora spaces and their connections to wider social movements. Kathryn, over to you.
Thank you so much, Nadia. I'm really delighted to introduce Fatma Bucak, who studied philosophy at Istanbul University and history of art and etching in Italy at the Albertina Academy of Fine Arts. She holds an MA in photography at the Royal College of Art in London. Fatma's work address the plurality of histories through a variety of artistic media, including photography, performance, sound, and video installation. The themes of political identity, historical memory, and gender are critical to her research. And her recent works have focused on the intersection between political power and climate change. Fatma has exhibited at many spaces across the globe, and we don't have time to go through all of them, but these include the Museum of Contemporary Arts in Toronto, the Pinchuk Art Center in Kyiv, the Jewish Museum in New York, the Kunsthaus Dresden, as well as Brown University. She earned a fellowship here at Columbia University in the Italian Academy for Advanced Studies and was an artist in residence at ISCP in Brooklyn. Fatma co-curated a year-long performance series called Transition, and that was in Istanbul, and she was the winner of the 9th Italian Council Award. Currently, she is a PhD candidate in the Department of Arts and Cultural Studies, Practice-Based Art Studies at the University of Copenhagen and Art Hub Copenhagen, and that's supported by the Novo Nordisk Artistic Research Grant. So welcome very much, Fatma. Hello. Hello.
Just let me sort of clarify the structure, the format of today's event. So Kathryn and I will be in conversation with Fatma for about 45 minutes to an hour. And meanwhile, we encourage you to put your questions or comments in the Q&A function, and we will have time for that. And I noticed there was already a question asking us whether this event will be recorded, and yes, it will be recorded and should be available in the future. So Fatma, I mean, I have a first question, but I want to say, of course, before this event, I have heard about you for a long time. So a good friend of mine, Hermione Wiltshire, I think she was your professor. So she's been always talking about this amazing Fatma. And then, of course, one of our dear colleagues here at Brown is a good friend of yours, also graduate student, Kate Creasy, and she has already been in conversation. So, and all this just sort of increased our wish to follow up further. Okay, so Fatma, my first question is around the title, because so the title, Gender, Borders, and Witnessing Operas, I have to admit this wasn't our title. I mean, Kathryn and I didn't come up with the title. I mean, the Witnessing Operas is something that you insisted on. And, several people asked me, so what is the link here? I mean, Gender, Borders, and Witnessing Operas, it doesn't really seem to fit. So obviously we want to know why the title, and how does it relate to your work?
Thank you very much, Nadja and Kathryn, for this invitation. I am really excited, to be honest. It's always a great pleasure to be able to presenting the work and having this conversation with like-minded people. So why? I actually do like witnessing operas, so I have to admit that first. And so maybe it's better to start a little from the beginning. So where this operas came into a place. So what you see on the screen, and I'm very sorry for how small it is. So it is actually an opera performance. That's a medium that I would like to neither call it performance nor opera. And it has both mediums, basically ideas somehow. And we can talk about it later on in the conversation, I think. And then it is written, and when I started to write, and it starts with an act one, and then it goes on with a lyric that it will become an opera. So where this witnessing comes, and then where this opera comes. Over the years, my work has took me in different places, and I lived and worked in different geographies and different historical contexts that we will see in different works here. And I have been thinking about history itself. And, while thinking about the history, I was just thinking, is it a peeling back the layers of an onion, revealing something that they're already there and meant to be seen? Or is it something like an excavation, uncovering something that it is not seen for a long time, a forgotten truth? Or perhaps sometimes it is simply a void and a space where certain stories and certain lives, and they never leave any trace. And I come to realize that there's all these perceptions and more likely be true when we think about the history. By this questioning, and I arrived to a point of asking other question. How then we reclaim those stories that they have been erased, overlooked, or deliberately left behind? Who bears witness to them? And why do some narratives become very easily distorted or hijacked to fit a particular agenda or a particular history? Through this journey, one of the things that remained in my thinking and in my research, a constant, was the role of the witness. So every time I found myself in a place facing a new story, thinking and talking and researching about new narratives and histories, I was not only listening, but also creating witnesses. So I began to see that the very act of being witness is about making place for those silent voices, and in doing so, trying to shift, or sometimes shifting actually, the very narrative we inherit. So now that I am actually working on a research with opera in mind as a form of storytelling, in thinking the forms of this medium's contemporaneity and the calling it opera performance, I cannot help myself to frame it as a witnessing opera, so that the opera, that it will be part of this research and it will be made after this research, it will be an opera that witnesses and is being witnessed. This is why we have this, I insisted on the title, including also the operas, since it will be the medium that it will be worked in this research. So if we have time, I would like to go into this, what this opera is looking into and what this research wants to say. So let's see if we can see a little bit of, but maybe I explain a little bit what is this. Then we can see a few passages from this lyrics that they are part of the libretto that I'm writing. So my current research is titled Sound of a Setting Sun, Can Another Opera Save Us? Interspecies Dialogues and the Politics of Listening in a Warming World, in many different layers that we will see during this conversation, I think. And of course, this is a question half in jest and half in despair. After all the sciences, policy briefs, and the warnings, what can be more done? And the fires rage, forest falls, the birds vanish, and yet the world moves as almost nothing has changed. What could a tree then possibly say to a soldier? What might a bird reveal to a human displaced by fire and ash? This research explores the intersection of climate catastrophe, as Kathryn was explaining, armed conflict and the non-human lives, through imagined dialogues between species such as a human, a bird, and a human, a tree. I'll be exploring, and I am actually doing during my research at the moment, how environmental collapse and war co-alter the displacement of both people and ecosystems. And I will be looking into especially an endangered bird species from the marshland area of Iraq, Mesopotamian marshland, which are profoundly impacted by both Saddam Hussein's 90s drainage and the American invasion, which I would like to underline after reading and looking into your conversation about what it is that we can understand about the history, that I changed my mind also about the sanctions of the 90s, what it did, which I think I never included. This is why I kept saying 2003 as the beginning of something. And that was very interesting for me now doing the research that actually informed me a lot. And so this will be one, and it will be part one of the opera at the same time. And I also will be examining a tree from a Dersim region, a Kurdish Alevi area where the burning forest has long been used as a military tactic, which we will probably return back during our conversations. So the question is, what can we learn from the other histories? Not just humans, but also of a tree, a bird. How might their voices sound if we only will be able to listen? And at the end, this research will have two parts. This is why I'm part of a practice-based PhD, and which is a research part that I will be continue to travel, because these areas, they are not new to me. They are not new geographies to me. I have been traveling there and working on the subject before, since 2016, actually. And at the same time, I will be preparing my libretto to then become and make this opera that we call through the title Witnessing Opera. So that is why the Witnessing Opera.
Can I just ask, Fatma, will this be, do you envisage this to be sung? Is this going to be performed?
Yeah. It's going to be an actual opera, but I don't want to call it opera because our understanding, especially within the European and American context, is the European opera, which has sung in certain languages, narrated certain stories. So this time we were going to shift. So this is why I would like to actually use, if possible, different languages. And different languages being Kurdish and Arabic at the moment, of a specific specific accents of the language, so much more an oral portions. And yes, it will be done. It will be done in my vision of opera more than, this is why I called it opera performance. So it's an opera that performs the witness at the same time. So that all this is gonna be, so the research will be a PhD research that I will be writing, but this research will include also a certain work, which I need 10 years, I think, but I have 3 to do it. A libretto, then a lot of collaborations that already is part of this research part. Then it will turn into opera part, which it will include a lot of different people also, composers, singers. Yeah, we'll go on it. I think maybe I should just, but I actually would like to say that it is very important to remember that, for example, someone like me, as a child, my understanding of history was vastly, and majority of the time, was shaped by oral stories, tales that they were passed down through generation, and often they are sung rather than spoken. So those stories, they were never just recalling of the past, they were testimonies also, that of whatever was forgotten, whatever silenced, and a way of making history by singing it into being. So this live memory that I had, it just basically became a revelation when I saw my first opera. So I was in Milano. I don't want to brag about it, but I saw this opera, and then, except that there were certain things that I could not stop thinking to compare, like I could not stop comparing it. So it was, instead of a landscape, it was a stage. Instead of a group of women I know that they were singing, they were sopranos. Instead of the wings of the sound of a falcon fighter's overhead, it was an orchestra of La Scala. And it was an explosion of different kinds of emotions. So it was an experience that I think I had it before, and I could see why it was very important, and I could also see why it was also boring at times. And so this powerful explosion of the opera language is part of my research because of it. And what you see at the moment on this slides is part of that libretto that I'm trying to write. So here we are in a story where a bird is describing a violent sounds that it has been heard by him, and trying to describe the painful destruction that it is created in a land, in a specific geography, which doesn't matter, doesn't names it. And it starts with, in the middle of nowhere, there was a sound. This great, glamorous, shiny birds, their wings were not moving much, perhaps because God giving them this much stability. These goddess-like appearance made them look as though they did not need to move. Oh, that gleaming, strong look that almost seduced me, as though I were Leda. It may have been an eagle, but it was no swan. More beautiful, noisier, an osmium-like smell. And it goes on. And then there's a conversation between this bird and the woman. It's just the beginning. And that is basically part of why we are talking about the opera today.
Well, I mean, that is much clearer now. I actually want to go back to some issues, especially around witnessing. But Kathryn, I think you wanted to
Yeah,
ask.
well, just a quick question before the
Yeah.
next question. Do you have the music in your mind? Or
Yes. It's actually very interesting because at the moment I'm writing a little bit of Kurdish, which we're going to return back to language of Kurdish language in Turkey, especially because I'm learning it. So I can actually understand Kurdish, but cannot respond. I never responded in Kurdish to my family, which will return back to idea of like why the prohibition of the language in Turkey and so on and so forth in the next steps, I think, in our conversation. And so it's written at the moment. I just basically cleared it out for this event. So it's being written, basically translated into different languages. But yes, it's
really exciting.
yeah, it's gonna be a music that we already trying out. So different notes, the notes that they actually remind of different kind of musicalities and different kind of singing methods that can be used and not necessarily the one that we are used to in European opera.
Yes, well, just moving on to the topic of body as archive.
Yes.
In many of your works, the body functions simultaneously as a witness, a site of memory, and a vessel of silence. How do you understand the body as an artist, subject, and spectator, as an archive of erased or unspeakable histories?
The question actually is such an interesting one, and actually it replies to many questions that it is asked within the question, and I actually loved it. So when I first saw the question, like when we are talking now, I can't really stop thinking that the body as archive carries, lives, and witnesses. So it's a living archive. So you can't really, I cannot not think as an artist, this archive as separated from my work and my thoughts and my thinking methods. Also, it becomes a method. So I remembered what Ursula Le Guin was talking about the gathering and the fundamental aspects of gathering, aspects of life, one that has been often overlooked in favor of stories about conquest, killing, and battle. Knowledge that she says primarily a cultural carrier back with which we collect, hold, and store. So then this knowledge we experience, we sense, and we sense, and our bodies become the primary living of archives of this collection, of this knowledge. So this is why I have my body and many other bodies in my work, and as a presence of the people living, and humans and non-humans. And so the body is a site, a place of memory, but also, as it is in your question, a vessel of silence, and it carries personal and collective histories, and it holds on what has been erased or left behind. And as an artist, I see the body as a place where the history is both written and erased, and which we will see during this work, which I would like to show it now. And it can be remembered and forgotten all at once. So if it is okay, maybe I would like to interrupt the conversation to see a work, and through which we can continue to discussion. Actually, a really short part of a 10-minute video. It called "Blessed Are You Who Come: Conversation on the Turkish-Armenian Border." It's a landscape, a texture ritualized encounter in a border village that once had Armenian population and lies in the terrain of conflict, displacement, and erasure. The video here presents a woman dressed in black, performing, walking, touching with her body, bread breaking beside the ruins of an Armenian church, the Church of the Redeemer. Then offering the pieces to a group of old men, no? while the men, they're just having this conversation and negotiation. And what we see is there are so many unspoken, unsayable in this place where we remember and understand that it is remarked by different kind of histories, that it is not acknowledged neither in the country nor by the people that they actually relocated in. And so it is interesting what my body does to them. And I'm talking about it's me actually. In many performances I have been, at the beginning especially, I have been almost always being present within the work one way or another. And it was very interesting to see how many things they were negotiated here. So there was a conversation in which the only remarks about making visible, only basically sentence that it's about complicity and suppression that was hidden. And what we expect to see, only the senses that remarks of any witnessing, was when one of them says, as Ottoman took everything, to respond to the other companion that wants to share, and discussing with someone who wants to take all the bread. And that is the only time you hear anything about the history. And in that history, there is no presence of neither Armenians or the other people that they live there, and so on and so forth. What was the negotiation in this? So then we have quite a lot, and it is very interesting because my presence, my body basically forces them, and my rituals or my kind of moving around them, with them, within them, it forces them to come to terms with the existence of another history that is falsifies the idea of a homogeneous essential national identity that it is created within the Turkish Republic today. And which is interesting, this is one of the many stories that this landscapes, not just in Ani, but in many parts of Turkey, that actually exist. And of course, there are other kind of hierarchies that we see. There is a gender, age, history, audiences, and geographical hierarchies. And the conversation shifts at some point for nearly 7 minutes. They talk about art and performance, and about our secret deal, the contract we signed behind the curtains, the money that I will give it to them. Then the negotiations become about whether they must stay or leave, and actually one of them at the end of the performance leaves. And then whether they can trust me or not. And only time one of them, when they mention that I am from the southern city, not the southeast, then I become trustable body. So it is a very interesting negotiations where the many people, many bodies, they carry a lot of different kind of aspects of what the land says. At the end of the day, we are in front of an Armenian church and we don't talk about it. And that says quite a lot, I think.
I was going to ask you about female witnessing, but if you wanted to continue.
Yes, I would like to actually add this part before we go to the next question, is that since we are talking about body as an archive, I would like to remind that it's not just remembering through the body or the presence of a body or presence of a being. We are also reclaiming. And so that's what I would like to do, what I am doing through my work. It's about reclaiming the stories that they have been erased, distorted, those that still need to be witnessed, those that are voids. So never remaining silent, even within the silence, in front of what is silenced. The body doesn't just remember or show what is in there. It reclaims, it makes us see and listen. So there I would like to talk about this work. I know that we will return back, but maybe just the first part of it, the video part, we can see a little bit. And we can keep the sound off while this is happening, so I can talk about the work. So this is a video work called Scarring the Press. And this is a part of a work that we probably discuss further in the conversation, that is So We Were Told. It's an installation of 135 images, each showing a pair of hands holding a jar which we will see some of the images afterwards. And it's handwritten. There's a handwritten date on that jar that starts with the 7th February, the day of the events known as the Basement Massacre, when over 150 civilians were killed by the Turkish security forces, in a city called Cizre, a Kurdish town near the Syrian border. So every day, over more than 3 months, I wash the national and regional newspapers printed in Turkey, starting with the ones that they were from 7 February, always using the same fixed quantity of the water. So in this video, you see the 3 of us basically doing the first batches of the newspapers, washing the first batches of the newspapers together on the outskirt of Istanbul. So starting from the 7th February, always using the same fixed quantity of the water, I have been then, after the 3 days of washing together, I have been continuing in my studio, basically day by day, doing exactly the same, I don't want to call it performance, but same act for days, for over 3 months, until we have been framed, let's say, so that we had to move on. We had to just close everything and close the studio, and I had to fly back to Italy and so on and so forth. So after each washing, the remaining water, the residue of what the newspaper carried, was kept in the jar, marked with that day's date. Although the initial amount of the water was always the same, the quantity and the color of what remained in the jar changed dramatically. To see one example, here it is, the 7th February actually. So although the initial amount of water was always the same, the quantity and the color changed day by day, basically. This was largely because the number of the newspapers, they changed. Outlets, these newspapers, mostly regional ones, reported on the violence in the region, or even slight subtle references about the events in Cizre, for shut down temporarily or permanently, so that the quantity of the newspaper washed in the same quantity of the water made it a big change within the jars and what they carried. So over the time, water in the jars becomes a material, a record basically of the silencing, growing basically darker, lighter, denser, and thinner. And it was almost a forensic quality that if you looked at it closely, you could see what it was erased and what it was not said. And the only evidence that remains of these washings is the video work that we saw before, and this installation that called "And So We Were Told," a series of photographies, 135 photographs. And of course, we have to be also careful about the idea what it happens when we are washing. The 3 women washing newspapers there, we carry that dark black stain on our hands. It almost suggests the idea of we have to not forget to talk about the consent too, which we will return back probably within our conversation to this idea of witnessing, consenting, and which is it's almost a very important part of how we transfer this information also.
Maybe this is a good moment to address that question. I mean, okay, so the first video, it's mainly men who are standing in that landscape, but when looking at your work, it often stages a female presence as a form of witnessing and endurance. And this is in landscapes that tend to be marked by loss, marked by violence. So my question, as someone who's sort of interested in looking at this tension between, on the one hand, vulnerability and agency, I'm wondering, how do you navigate that tension, and in terms of representing women's bodies in spaces?
It's a really great question. So I actually do think, and I think that's basically a thought of many scholars like yourself also, that the female body is a site of knowledge, resistance, and deep emotional intelligence also. So we carry, and when I place a woman's body in a landscape shaped by the violence, or on a stage, which we will see further on the conversation, I'm not trying to reproduce victimhood, but to reveal the layers of perceptions and memory and endurance that these bodies carry. For me, witnessing is an embedded act. It happens through also sensorial knowledge that precede the language sometimes. Women in my work, they are never passive observers also. They are active actors in front of what it is silenced. And they are receivers of the world's tremors and sometimes through the languages of humor. And the tension between, and it's a really interesting, it's a really interesting thing to think about vulnerability. Is it really a contrast when we think about the agency? I think the tension between the vulnerability and the agency is not something that this works can solve, and that's not even the aim. Instead, I think it's a place where meanings is made. Vulnerability, I think it is a great concept also to work on the idea of how we can open our bodies to the world. It allows to the landscape histories, its wounds, its silence to be felt also. So this agency arises from that openness, I think, openness towards the vulnerability. And that I think it is a really, really important to not to escape from, and not to be seeing it as something dangerous to talk, and that's I think for me it has been very important while I was working with myself and with other women also. And so when the women are silenced in a stage, for example, as we will see in another video called They Burned It All, or in a landscape, it is the silence of someone choosing to be present. So that's something we have to remember. Yeah. In a place where the disappearance is always possible. So they don't disappear, they exist, they basically insist on being there. So that silence is not a basically vulnerability or acceptance of the vulnerability and insistence of the resistance. So whether standing in a desert, carrying an object, or facing a weight of an invisible past, conversing with others, which we will see now, suggested place for you to see it, observing a story, or singing, they don't perform the submission. Instead, they insist on right of existence, to know and to endure. So this is not merely what survives, it is also what remembers. So these bodies, they remember, they sense, they transform, and they pass us on. And if it is okay, I would like to just show a bit of another work.
Yaptı gitti mi diyor?
Bir şey yapacak.
Ay bir şey arayacak orada.
Ne arayacak?
Altın, petrol.
Senin düşürdüğün 5 milyonu eşin arayacak.
Ne çıkıyor?
Ay pardon buldu.
Bunun altı çamurmuş kız.
Derin olması lazım değil mi?
Ama çok kötü kokuyor. Gelirken hiç mi almadın?
Evet.
Kokuyor.
Ama bütün koçların lağımı burada.
Ya buraya mı akıyor kız lan? Ciddi misin?
Ona da şifa.
Bak ben onu da
Hayır,
duymuştum.
Dur define arıyor hiç bozmayayım. Ne diyecekler?
İlk çağ insanların birini taklit ediyor sanırım.
Bence de sanki. Hataydı adamın üstüne atacak herhalde.
Bence de onun üstüne.
Bence de.
Yapma.
Geliyor
Attı.
geliyor.
Ay, sırtına yapıştırdın. Ay. Yapıştırdı. İyi oldu, iyi oldu.
İyi oldu.
Şifadır.
İyi oldu.
Şifadır kızım çamur.
Demek öyle durur dediler. Onu söyle onun için duruyor.
Tabii canım işte yapacağı şey oydu.
Hadi.
Pardon.
Ne dağıttı ya.
Kadının fendi erkeği yendi oynattı.
Neden acaba? Olmadı mı? Olmadı.
Deniyor, yapacağım diyor illa baksana.
Yani.
Israrı da güzel.
So this is a video work, as you see, it's actually two video works that they're one work. They are two screen that they appear generally separately though. And so this is a suggested place for you to see it. We see 13 women that they're watching a performance that it is happening in front of them. It's another video work that I am actually in it. It's called God Bless Them. And they are simultaneously recorded with two different cameras. So it is a performance carried out by me and my brother that's happening in front of them, that the piece is basically revisiting the story of the creation myths of monotheist religions. And so it's a kind of, the stage becomes a negotiation between me and him and a negotiation of the gender. So this is why they keep saying, you can't really make it, he's too strong, and so on and so forth. So what I wanted to do is just to let them watch. And our agreement was they're going to watch this thing and they're going to talk about it. So audience for the audiences. And the group, of course, it just didn't stop talking only about what I was doing, but also they started to compare to a popular culture, calling it looks like a Survivor. I think it's a program that has been happening in many countries. And it was very interesting, this hearing these dialogues, because while I was performing, I could not hear them. And then I just, at the end of our conversation, I saw our performance, basically, I saw it at nighttime, and I got very worried, thinking like, oh my God, they're just talking too much about everything. They're talking about me, they're talking about men, they're talking about women, they're talking about this program that I found it distasteful. Why they comparing to me? It was a very interesting way of redealing and re-understanding how you cannot stop people talking about what they know of what they can compare to also. And very interesting is that this is something that probably looks like that. If you see a woman trying to eat not cooked meat of a huge meat, then you may actually want to compare it with the gesture of the survival that you saw it in the program. And so it was very interesting. The dialogues, they were exposing basically different kind of cultural backgrounds also. Obviously, we noticed that there is an ethnically different backgrounds in one stage. There are Kurdish women, there are Turkish women, there is humor. In this stage, they unfold a lot of different kind of conversation. They talk about if this is a theater performance, if this is really happening, is she really eating? Is she really basically fighting with the sky? Is it all, arranged, and so on and so forth? And it was very interesting for me also to have the idea, have the openness and no interruption, and perhaps the freedom of being able to talk even about the art that we just get very intimidated sometimes in front of it. It made it much possible for all of us to understand, what it means being a group of women and talking about this story that is happening in front of them. What is the take if we are in one geography different from another? And so I'm not sure if it is a good idea to go to another work from here, but
Yeah, sure. Yes.
yeah,
Of course.
I
Yeah.
would like to actually just a piece of it, because I know we're gonna return back. We talked about the Kurdish language, which was very, I think it's in at the moment, I have been thinking a lot about the erasure of different identities and how it is done. What is the strategy and techniques that they have been used over and over in different countries? And it comes to a place where you do understand when it is tactic, learned from whom, I have no idea, but they already repeated in different histories. And so I have been I have been traveling around the Turkish Kurdish areas in different moments, especially during during the 2016-17, but I have been long working and thinking about it by coming from those territories. And it was very interesting for me to understand how those lens and understanding of the Kurdish identity, even for me, it changed by just simply being and understanding in different geographies. I say all the time to my Palestinian friends that I learned more about my Kurdish identity in Palestine than ever I did, because I did have a language for it now. And it's really interesting how we shape and how we learn as much as the military tactics they learn between each other. And so just to keep in our mind, this is a video work that you're going to see. Again, it's actually a 2 video work. We're going to see one part of it. So there is a chorus standing on a stage facing a woman crawling through a charred forest, which we are not going to see it here. And they start a conversation with totally silent. It was very difficult to be silent, isn't it? And then they stop, they don't move. And you start hearing this music, this composition, almost recognizable notes. Made European recognizable notes, understanding that actually they are sung in a different language. So it is only made by one sentence that says her tişevitandın in Kurdish. It means they burned it all, letter by letter. So the source to us remains unknown as much as the chorus that they are there. And just to keep in mind, and they are Turkish women working for this public stage, where although there is no prohibition to today, after the 90s, the prohibition has been lifted. The social struggle, stigma, and erasure of the Kurdish language has been in place in a way that still today, staging a theater in a theater piece in Kurdish in a public space is almost impossible. So this is one of those stages that I hired for a day. They didn't know what was a language, but we agreed on that it's going to happen some things that they're going to be part. And this time they just stand there and listen. This happening, basically.
Yavaş yavaş. Biraz daha aşağıya.
So the transaction in this video has been very much transparent. So I just hired them with their woman chorus to listen this time instead of speaking. And it was a really interesting experience, because the year before, the last time when they tried to actually present I think it was a Dario Fo translated into Kurdish in a Ghazi, in a quarter, basically a place in Istanbul, which is more than 50%, 60% of the people are Kurdish. The theater received basically a letter saying that unfortunately people in the area has been very disturbed by this idea, so that they cannot actually allow the theater to be presented on the stage. So, and this was not the one thing, that was not the first time this was happening. So it was very interesting to see and think about what is the language here, like what it is that they are trying to erase. So we had until the 90s, the Kurdish language is prohibited. You're talking about over 25% of the people of Turkey. And all basically, I think, Nadje, you had a lot about this research, about talking about the Kemalist woman and what is the feminism in Turkey and what it meant, the language. So although the language prohibition has been lifted in the 90s, in 91, the language still marked by the social struggle and stigma and erasure because of the geographical context. So what it meant was relation with the PKK, the organization that it is labeled as, that is called as terrorist by the Turkish government, and the fights and the war and everything that it is to do with the Kurdish identity, and including the language itself, has to be erased. Otherwise, how you could carry. But here we see a group of women, they're listening and they're really happy also. That's just basically doesn't sound to them anything very scary, isn't it? So it is interesting that suddenly the notes, the way in which it's presented, changed everything. They don't know this is Kurdish. They just experience it. Our agreement was they are gonna hear it's gonna be basically a sound sung by other 10 people, other 10 Kurdish women, and it will be in another language, because Kurdish language is another language and nothing else. And basically that was not dangerous. But if I would say we're gonna actually present this work with the Kurdish language, singing this sentence with the Kurdish language, that would have been not possible for us neither to rent nor perform with this woman and nor make it possible. And that is the tension that we were talking about, the vulnerability before. I think it is basically part of this work too. And it is interesting to think how this kind of gestures opens up different kind of ideas to understand, even though legally something is not prohibited, doesn't mean socially is accepted. And that's the dilemma, I think, when we talk about, this kind of landscapes and this kind of lands and geographies, the politics of it, and how actually the struggle has different forms of it, daily base. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. No, I mean, I, continuously struck listening to you how so many of the themes and issues that are very sort of nuanced and complex. I mean, Kathryn and I were trying to talk about it, to write about it, but your, your way of artistically engaging with it, I think really allows for more layers of complexity and nuance that I feel, it's not accessible to us as academics, but I certainly feel it resonates a lot.
Yeah, but it's basically, I do quite a lot of long-term researches before doing any work. I end up like being in a field, talking with the people, and the reason this work was born was simply because people, they whispered in our conversations in those areas of Turkey, but again and again, this sentence, they burned it all. And it was such a fascinating sentence without telling they whom, all what. So it's basically silencing while repeating it. And that was a very interesting, for me, it was a very interesting ways to understand how this kind of struggles, sometimes they're just minimal, they're just small. And only through those small sounds and only through those small whispers and only those half sentences you can understand, now we have to look into this. And because there should be something in this, not being any evidence of it. So evidence becomes that sentence. This sentence was the entire work that it will be built into new opera, for example. And that will be, of course, a lot of research, a lot of talking with the people. But the starting point is this basically an unknown sentence that only makes sense if we look at that geography, that story. And yeah.
Yeah, so while we continue the conversation, I would just like to encourage our audience, if you have any questions or comments, please use the Q&A function to do so. Kathryn?
Yes, I have a question about borders and the untranslatable. But beforehand, just to go back what Nadia was discussing, and I'm also really intrigued by your process, your methodology, which comes across very ethnographic. And as an ethnographer, I'm really fascinated by the work that you're doing, and I'm curious to know how you get your interlocutors and to
By insisting, by being present for real long.
Right.
Yeah, so that they cannot get rid of. For example, the Blessed Are You Who Come, and we are talking about over a decade ago. That was my first actually work. I was too young, too excited, and too anxious about everything, and I was just trying to kind of understand what it will be my take if I would go there and then actually talk about this as an artist. And actually, Nadje, this was my finishing work for Royal College of Art, which made a big complicated conversation with my friends from London, which we will return back, how ethically we can comprehend and understand a piece, and which was very interesting. Everybody misunderstood because the hierarchy that exists between me and them, it just didn't resonate with the British colleagues that they were there, with the colonial history, what is the being present, also present time problems, what is the age and what is an old man means in that territory, differently from what an old man might mean in our territories, and which is interesting. So for example, to do that work, I passed in a tent, and I didn't have so much money by then also, not that I have much now, but at least I could not actually afford the hotels and etc. But I had to insist to these people that I really need to do this work and they have to be in it. And so it took me over 3 weeks in a tent nearby the villages, by being present every day in their different meeting points. So at some point they just said, you know what, okay, it seems like you're not going to go. At least we do this work. And with women, it was a little different. So it was much more a few weeks together trying to understand what was the work. They were much more engaged. So with men, it just took so much convincing. But when I go to other territories, which we will come with the border question of yours, for example, when I was in Mexico and US, in Texas, for example, it was a totally different idea, and it meant a different kind of presentation from my side and what it meant to me. Or for example, when I was in Cairo, which we will come to that work too, hopefully, but the interesting part is like every place, although equally leaves or either parallelly leaves certain kind of questioning about certain narratives that I would like to bring it there, they actually have a different ways of engaging. So either you understand that takes time, or you just cannot be even present. Like maybe you can do the research, but doing and making a work with their presence, it almost it takes a lot of convincing. So even just opening these conversations where the woman started to whisper they burned it all, it took a lot of me being there, me trying to explain them I'm not the danger, or I'm not going to do anything more than what I promised them to do. And also we have to remember sometimes people, they change their mind, they accept something that they can actually deny that they accepted, those kind of stuff, that those kind of experiences and processes, they happen. And you know, the ethical questions is going to be always there, and even after you do the work. And it's very interesting how the work is presented as a video or photography. It actually includes a present time ethical questions, because there are other people, and because there are other stories that you're taking the responsibility of, and it is never finishing responsibility. That's a responsibility that you cannot get rid of it because the work is finished or someone signed a document.
It's ongoing.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you mentioned border zones, which you've been working on, and obviously Turkey and Syria is one border, but also the U.S. and Mexican frontier. So I'm wondering how these geographies of transition shape your visual and conceptual language. And do you see border thinking as a feminist practice?
Yeah, we look on a map and then we see lines and borders as a concept and as a living thing is never just some lines on a map. They are lived, felt, and carried by people working across multiple border zones, as you said, Syria, Turkey, Armenia, US, Mexico. And I actually started to have a different kind of understanding of what is the border language, because there is and exist, and it changes from one border to another. And they are places which I'm trying to not to say space. It becomes very complicated for me to think about the word of space because it almost not tangible. Borders are places of transition, tension, and often absence. They expose what can move, what must remain, what is silently lost. And they also they make visible the untranslatable traces of lives, gestures, and histories, and those cannot fully cross from one side to another. I would like to actually explain a little bit where we are, what's happening. So a decade ago, I spent a very hot summer traveling between different border cities in Texas while I was an artist in resident for a place called Art Pace, for over 3 months. Of course, quickly realizing such a complex borders are the American borders. You have the 20s restriction about the immigration laws targeting only Italians and Eastern European Jews. And then you have the 90s with the NAFTA and later 9/11. You have fences, strict controls, fortified checkpoints, transforms the landscape. So I actually, in my life for the first time, saw border patrol, heard it, read it, and it was a very interesting subject because the shape of the landscape changed suddenly. So by 2015, while I was there, Texas was already the preferred route, which was the most dangerous one also, into the United States. So I was in a town called, mostly visiting a town called Falfurrias, and it was not even a town, but what I would call of a town. It did not have anything of a town, so it was almost absent, and there was the presence that you could be seeing or hearing. It was the border patrol. So there I met with someone called Lavoja Durham, which I'm going to show you a short video of him just to understand who we are talking. It's a cowboy. If I remember correctly, it was the only living cowboy in the area. And he was overseeing a ranch called King. It was the biggest ranch in the area. And when we started to talk about his role and how many people they were crossing, so of course we arrived at the question of how many people they died that year. So he struggled a little bit, made a call to sheriff, and had this really lovely conversation. And in between that conversation, he asked, by the way, how many people they died this year? And then the sheriff said 28. So that was numerically small. And so I was very curious about it, understanding very shortly that the local authorities estimate that only 10 to 15% of deaths were found. So we are talking about 28 people. It's August, halfway through the year, and we have only 10 to 15%. So I don't want to even calculate, and this is one of the 256 areas of Texas. It was incredible. The number, the estimates, and then he was explaining, almost being proud, that he reported over 20 of these people, of these immigrants, that they were trying to walk in these borders himself during the last few years. So walking the borders, I started to this walking the border patrol area, which is between the actual border and where the physical border patrol is. And I realized that there are different kind of clothings on the soil. And that was in itself very hard to experience. So I began digging into the soil, collecting different, mostly colorful fragments of clothing, shorts and jackets and jeans in various states of decay, depending on when they have been left and how far I could dig in this specific area. So many of those clothes were found deep in the Texas borderlands. And as you may know, the land, unlike the Arizona, it's almost entirely privately owned. So these fragments that they are coming from, each of them, they're coming from one cloth. We put them together, cutting basically these pieces from each clothing that I was collecting. We put together with a group of Mexican women. We sewed them together and we created this huge 5 meters to 6 meters of quilt. I don't know what it is in your measure. And it became very colorful quilt of 1,000 pieces collected and sewn together. And it is interesting to understand that these clothing did not solely originated by the dead bodies, but mostly yes. And at some point in a video that we will watch shortly, Lavoja explains most of the dead are found unclothed, often claimed by the wildlife. This experience of embodies what I understand as border thinking. And it is attentive, ethical, and thinks and sees whatever is absent and senses the traces and remembers. So yes, I see this as a feminist practice because it resists the closure and singular narrative, privileging multiplicities, endurance, and persistence of the bodies navigating imposing boundaries and borders, and those who cross them teach us how to embrace this uncertainty, to hold what cannot be, and to make visible what would often tries to be erased. So this is how the De Silencio was born. And I would like to show you a short video because during that time I did different works that they were part of this research in this borderlands. This is a performance that it is done in two border crossing areas, landscapes, with an undocumented group and documented women group.
Jesús sacramentado, enemigos del venir, la sangre de tus costados, de ellos nos ha de librar.
So I'm going to cut short just to show you who is Lavoja, the person who actually allowed me in ways to understand physically what is these borders and how you can walk them for weeks and how you can collect all these pieces I collected. And it was the absurdity of his presence let me actually think how differently it was seen by him, something that I was experiencing in a totally different way. Okay, these are the clothes that you have it everywhere. And it almost feels is a made-up scene. And this is Lavoja.
All right, well, like I said, I've got the illegals crossing, and they hit 3 zones on their way. One is the Free Nili zone, which is over there in the Rio Grande Valley once they come across the river. The reason it's a Free Nili zone is because everybody knows everybody, and they got all the connections, and they got stash houses, and they organize their trips to bring these illegals further north as far as they can to hit the ground and walk around the Border Patrol checkpoint. And the Free Nili Willy zone is in the valley. Then I call this if you catch me if you can zone. Catch me if you can zone.
I can't handle
where,
it.
Oh, I don't know, probably 70, 75, 80 die on the way around. Most of them die of dehydration. We only find 10 or 15%. So we figure out that 75 or 80 die every year, and especially during the summer. That's one death, and some of them do get caught, they get raided, and some of them get away.
Can we put the sound off, Julian?
Some of them just stay behind.
Okay. So between many people I met during this research period, and he actually made it more sense to understand the policies around this border of university research that they have been done around the idea that how we can actually work on the unknown bodies, and then how we can actually get a funding to understand how the DNA test can be done in a country and in a place such as that rich as Texas. It was missing the money when it will come to look into who is whom for the migrants, and it was a lot to take in, and so this is why there are different kinds of also research methods and works that was going on at the same time while I was working, researching and meeting and so on and so forth.
Very troubling, very fascinating, and amazing work. I like to shift a bit, and what I have in mind is a specific piece of yours. I think it's called Scouring the Press and Remains of What Has Not Been Said.
Yeah.
And in that work, you transform acts of erasure into tactile gestures, washing, bottling, preserving. So, I mean, you've talked a little bit about that already. Yeah. But I guess the broader question here is, how do you think about materiality and repetitive labor as strategies for political testimony?
So yes, we saw a part of it, especially when we were looking at the Scouring the Press. So through this works that they are different mediums, different kinds of work, but they are the methods that I actually repeat, because I think it's very important to repeat things. People, they forget them. And so erasure becomes a physical encounter rather than an absence of an idea. For me, the materiality is a way of refusing that something will or should or can disappear. So when I wash a newspaper or seal a residue in a bottle, as it is happening here, I am accepting, acknowledging that the histories embedded in these materials, they simply shift state, and the gesture becomes kind of insistence on touch, on repetition, on bodily presence. So repetitive labor interests me because it mirrors the slow thinking, often visible work of living under the pressure of political pressure at the same time, as we discussed, like what happens in a daily basis in a social life. These are not, sometimes they are not big things, they are not fast things also. The daily negotiation, the quiet endurance, the rituals that sustain the communities even when the language fails. These actions are not demonstrations in the traditional sense, but nevertheless, they are forms of testimony. They create a rhythm, a pulse, a trace that the body carries. In repeating, you accumulate also. The hands remember what the institutions and governments would forget or prefer to forget. And sometimes, as the washing unfolds the traces that leaves on the hands, some other traces, we think about our consents also, our involvement to that. So materiality is not just a medium, but a witness. So we have the water, we have the paper, we have the sediment, we have these photographs, and we have the date. They all become participant in the act of remembering. And this is why I think it is good to underline I am showing the political testimony that can be intimate, fragile, and tactile, and still rooted not only in the speech, but in the persistence of making the meaning at the same time. So these are all part of the performance we saw it. So every day, one performance will happen. Every day, one quantity of the water will go in, and every day's water will change the color, the density, and the quantity that it remains in these jars. Yeah, maybe I would like to close it with this.
Yes. So we are quickly running out of time. We have,
Yes.
I think, about 9 minutes left. So maybe one or two questions. Kathryn, do you want to ask another question? I don't think we have any from the audience. So
About your work on ecology and conflict, your piece, While the Dust Quickly Falls, links ecological degradation to state violence. Could you elaborate on how environmental damage becomes both a metaphor and evidence of political oppression in your work?
So without going to any work, maybe just a quick, so as we discussed at the beginning, while we were discussing about the name of this talk, that I wanted to underline that through this new work and through many works that I did it since 2015, I explored the landscapes scarred by war, industrial extraction, and the state neglect, where the degradation of soil, water, air is inseparable from the oppression of the people who inhabit these places. So ecological damage is not an abstract. It registers the history of control, exploitation, erasure that is imposed by the power. So at the same time, the the landscape itself becomes and is a witness. So burned fields, polluted rivers, in many works we saw it also, and dust-laden air are traces of conflict. They hold the memory of violence long after the immediate events have happened, after a war, after a conflict, after an attack. By attending to these traces, I try to reveal how harm is layered against land, against people, against memory itself. In a way that the ecological collapse becomes a tangible form of testimony, a material that archive of the state of violence, not the state of violence, while also a metaphor for fragility and endurance and interdependency of life and politics. So they are not separate entities ever. Through gestures such as collecting soil, preserving fragments, or listening to a landscape as it happens in the They Burned It All, I aim to make it visible or hearable, but it is often overlooked and even sometimes absent, how nature and society are entangled, and how the environmental harm can speak the silent of ongoing oppression. And all this is basically part of what we call what we can actually discuss about the ecological catastrophes in a conflicted areas, which is a different language anyway.
So I might just want to ask the last question and kind of a bit looking to the future, because I know that, I mean, much of your work deals with loss, it deals with erasure, but it also gestures towards futurity. And so my question is, what does it mean to create an archive, not just of what has been lost, but also of what might still be possible? And you have a few minutes for that.
Okay.
4 minutes.
Can we show the last image? So while I'm talking, there is something that we can hold on to say this might be the future also. So I'm not gonna explain this work. We won't have time, but I find it very difficult. It's an uneasy question, and because I'm not sure when and how the futurity is something that appears during the process of making or researching. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm not saying it exists. It's just simply a question that I find it almost intimidated, because are we talking about the future like an hopeful future that we have to see? Are we talking about the future as it is and looking at the present time events to understand how depressive and how difficult it is to think about the future? So just to think as an artist and as a work, as a researcher, and how and why we can think about future, and what is the futurity concept comes into work. And I don't know exactly when and how, but everything we act upon, there is always a piece of future. So that's something that I want to keep in mind, not as a positive or negative thinking. It's just simply a process to understand this is why being silent in front of what it is silence, it doesn't make any sense, because the future, it exists and it will come, and whatever we do today, it will actually appear as a part of what we call it the future. So through it is direct or indirect effects, perhaps even a change that can shake the future, which I don't deny that could even happen with the artworks, which I think many of us, including artists, us, that we doubt about what we do. I think as a researcher, I started to have some kind of similar doubts, but I think this is a similar ideas of what we do, how it can affect the future. I'm not sure, but the thought of possibility is probably most direct connection to think about the future, whatever the future might hold in relation to my work, at least.
Yeah,
A cultivated rose that grows or dies, a liquid that carries an evidence, and or plants that we are seeing here, I'm not going to explain, but cultivated as a part of medical history with the potential of future uses, or even recorded sound. All of these gestures, I think, in small ways, looks towards the futurity. So that's where the possibility is the ways in which I can talk about the futurity through my work, I think.
Yeah, well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Fatma. I would like to give a shout out to Kate Tracy here at Brown, and also to Hermione Wiltshire for having introduced me to you and your work, Fatma. Many thanks for sharing this time and space to be in conversation. As I said, we have recorded this event, so we will make it available if you want to rewatch it or share it with other friends. And also, thanks to Kathryn as always. I always enjoy our conversations, and there are more to come. Kathryn and I are working on this project. We have been working on it for a while, and we hope to actually pursue it as a book project. So watch this space. Of course, thank you for our colleagues who've made this possible here at Brown. And thank you to you all for joining us and for watching and listening.
And the best of luck with your witness opera, which I can't wait to see. And
thank you very much. It's just always great to have different kind of conversations about this. And thank you very much for inviting. Thank you very much for making it happen, Julianne, Kyle, and Barbara, Nadja, Kathryn, and thank you very much. And thank you very much all.